Imagine you're just, sitting in a crowded, maybe slightly damp movie theater. The lights go down, the screen flickers, and suddenly the seat beneath you literally starts vibrating.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like actually buzzing. People around you are screaming, half in absolute terror, half in sheer delight. Or maybe you're walking into a totally different theater across town, and the usher hands you this brightly colored paper bag.
Let me guess, it's not for popcorn.
No. You think it's for popcorn, but they tell you with a completely straight face that it's a vomit bag, just in case the movie gets to be too much for your delicate stomach.
I mean, that sounds less like a night at the cinema and way more like some kind of carnival ride mixed with a massive liability nightmare.
Right. But that was actually just a typical Friday night at the movies back in the mid-20th century. So welcome to the deep dive. Today, our mission is to explore the chaotic, totally scrappy, and surprisingly influential world of the B-movie.
Yeah, it's a wild history.
It really is. We're going to use our sources today to figure out how the low-budget, kind of bottom half of a double feature didn't just survive on the absolute fringes of Hollywood, but actually shaped the modern cinematic landscape that you and I consume every single day.
I think it's so important because, we tend to use the term B-movie today as a casual insult.
Yeah.
Like, it's just shorthand for something cheap or poorly acted or just, frankly, badly made.
Exactly, like a knockoff.
Right. But the reality of cinema history tells a completely different story. B-movies are really this pure reflection of economic necessity. They're the direct result of shifting distribution models, rapid cultural adaptation, and just this ruthless, unapologetic drive to capture an audience's attention by literally any means necessary.
Okay, let's unpack this from the very beginning, because we really need to go back to Hollywood's golden age in the 1930s. You can't really understand the B-movie without understanding the brutal math of the early studio system, right?
Yeah, exactly. So in the late 1920s and early 30s, if you were making an average A-list feature at a major studio, like MGM or Fox, you were spending anywhere between $190,000 to maybe $275,000.
Which was a fortune back then.
An absolute fortune. And if it was a massive historical spectacle, I mean, that budget could easily push $1 million. But down on the absolute fringes of the industry at these tiny independent studios that everyone affectionately called Poverty Row.
Poverty Row, I love that name.
Yeah, it's very descriptive. They were churning out what they called quickies. And these had micro budgets, sometimes as low as $3,000.
Wait, a $3,000 movie? I mean, the catering budget on a modern set probably burns through that before lunch on the first day.
Oh, easily. And they weren't just cheap, they were incredibly fast. Like some of these Poverty Row films were shot from start to finish in 4 days.
4 days.
Yeah, they were maximizing absolutely every single resource. They'd completely reuse sets from bigger movies in the middle of the night and just work the crews around the clock until they dropped.
But, cheap and fast doesn't automatically mean profitable. So how did this become an actual sustainable business model?
Well, the real catalyst that made the B-movie a permanent fixture was a massive technological shift right around 1929, the widespread adoption of sound film.
Ah, right. Because sound suddenly made producing live acts, which theaters always used to feature before the main silent movie, way too complicated.
Exactly, it was just too expensive. The logistics of micing up a live vaudeville act in a cinema suddenly didn't make any financial sense.
So the theaters have this massive gap to fill.
Precisely. To fill that gap and keep audiences in their seats for the whole evening, theaters developed a brand new programming model. You go in and get a newsreel, maybe a short or a cartoon, and then the second feature.
Which is the B-movie.
Right. This is the birth of the double feature. And crucially, the B-movie, the second feature, actually screened before the main event.
Right. It was literally the warm-up act. But here's the thing that really trips me up about this era. If these Poverty Row movies were being shot in 4 days for absolute pennies, and the quality was, let's be honest, highly questionable, what guaranteed that they would actually make any money?
That's the big question.
Yeah. Like, why would a theater owner willingly choose to play a terrible $3,000 Western?
Because they often just didn't have a choice. The major studios controlled the entire distribution pipeline, and they employed two incredibly powerful, frankly, monopolistic practices: block booking and blind bidding.
Okay, break those down for me.
So if an independent theater owner wanted access to a studio's glamorous, highly anticipated A picture, the one with the big stars that would actually draw a crowd, they were legally forced to rent that studio's entire output for the year. They had to buy the movies in a massive block.
Wow.
And worse, they often had to sign the contract sight unseen, before the movies were even shot. That's the blind bidding part.
So wait, block booking is essentially the 1930s equivalent of a modern cable TV bundle.
That is a perfect way to look at it.
Like, you really just want the premium sports channel, the A movies, so you can show the big game to your customers. But the provider forces you to pay for 50 obscure, weird channels you'll never watch, the B movies, just to get access to the one thing you actually want.
That's exactly it. And because of that forced bundle system, B-movies weren't rented out to theaters based on how well they actually performed at the box office. They were just rented at a flat fee.
Oh, so the risk is gone.
Completely. The profitability of almost every B-movie was baked into the math before the cameras even started rolling. The studios didn't need them to be critical masterpieces.
Yeah.
They just needed them to be exactly 65 minutes long and delivered on time to fill out that block.
That creates a really bizarre creative environment, doesn't it? If quality isn't the primary goal, but sheer volume is, you essentially have this weird sandbox.
Yeah, exactly.
Because there's no financial pressure for these movies to be massive, box office hits, they accidentally become this incredible training ground for Hollywood.
That is the great irony of the 1930s B-movie. Young actors, writers, directors, they could learn their craft, make huge mistakes, and just experiment without the crushing weight of a massive A-list budget on their shoulders.
Right.
John Wayne is actually the perfect example of this. Before he was an American icon, he cut his teeth making dozens of low-budget westerns, which were the absolute bread and butter of the Poverty Row circuit.
And because they were desperate to stand out within that massive bundle of movies, some of these independent films just leaned into ideas that were completely unhinged in the best possible way.
Oh, yeah. They got weird.
I mean, take a 1938 movie called The Terror of Tiny Town. It's a low-budget Western, completely standard plot, but the entire cast was made up of little people.
Right.
It sounds like a pure, bizarre novelty, but it was so wildly successful in its independent theatrical run that Columbia Pictures, an actual major studio, stepped in and picked it up for wide distribution.
Which is amazing. It proved that an audacious gimmick, even if it was executed cheaply, could actually punch above its weight and compete with the major studios if it was marketed well.
But this golden age model couldn't last forever, right?
No, it was destined to collapse. In 1948, the entire Hollywood ecosystem was hit by an existential disruption. The Supreme Court handed down the Paramount Decree, which was this massive antitrust ruling against the major studios.
So the Supreme Court essentially looked at the cable bundle of block booking, saw that the studios owned the production, the distribution, and the actual physical theaters, and just declared it an illegal monopoly.
Exactly. The studios were forced to sell off their theater chains and completely outlaw block booking. So suddenly, every single movie had to compete on its own merits.
Oh, wow. So a theater owner didn't have to buy a bad B movie to get the A movie anymore.
Nope. And to make matters worse for the studios, right at that exact same moment, television started creeping into American living rooms.
Right, because if you're a family in, say, 1951, why pay money to go out and see a cheap, low-budget Western in a theater when you could just stay on your couch and watch a classic Western on TV for free?
The traditional double feature was dying overnight. Studios panicked. Eagle Lion, a big B studio, folded entirely. Monogram had to completely rebrand itself as Allied Artists just to escape the stigma. The B movie had to either evolve immediately or go completely extinct.
Which brings us to the 1950s, and this fundamental shift in how movies were sold.
Yes. A new studio emerged called American International Pictures, or AIP. It was founded by James H. Nicholson and Samuel Z. Arkoff. They looked at the landscape and realized the traditional family audience was staying home with their televisions.
Right, they lost the parents.
But there was a new, massive demographic that actively wanted to get out of the house. Teenagers.
And teenagers do not want to watch the polite, sanitized melodramas their parents are watching. They want things that are loud, rebellious, and edgy, and most importantly, they want to watch them away from their parents.
Which leads perfectly into the massive drive-in theater boom. In 1945, there were only 96 drive-ins in the United States. A decade later, there are over 3,700 of them.
That growth is staggering.
AIP aggressively targeted this drive-in demographic, and they changed the economic mechanics to do it. Instead of renting out their double bills on a flat fee, which remember capped how much money a B movie could make, they started offering them on a percentage rental basis.
Oh, I see. So if the movie bombed, the theater didn't lose much. But if the movie became a massive hit with the local teens, the independent studio took a huge cut of the upside.
Exactly. It shifted the risk and the reward.
Yeah.
And the returns were just staggering. Look at a film like I Was a Teenage Werewolf from 1957.
Classic title.
It cost roughly $100,000 to produce.
Yeah.
Because it struck an absolute nerve with the youth culture, it grossed $2 million.
2 million.
Yeah. That completely flips the power dynamic in Hollywood. Suddenly, the scrappy independents are the ones generating this incredible return on investment.
And it creates the era of Roger Corman, the undisputed king of the bees. I mean, the man was a machine of efficiency. He shoots a movie called Monster from the Ocean Floor for $12,000 in 6 days.
He was legendary for that.
But I have to stop you here and ask about the marketing side, specifically William Castle, because he's the guy who invented Percepto for the movie The Tingler, which is where our buzzing seats from the intro come in.
Yes, William Castle.
He literally wired theater seats with military surplus buzzers. And for the movie Macabre, he offered death by fright life insurance policies to the audience.
A brilliant marketer.
But I have to push back a bit. This sounds less like filmmaking and more like a desperate carnival barker trying to trick people into buying tickets. Was the actual filmmaking just so terrible they needed these massive distractions?
What's fascinating here is that it's really easy to look at it as a distraction, but it was actually the birth of modern event marketing.
Event marketing.
Yeah. You have to consider the viewing environment of the 1950s teenager. At a drive-in, you were dealing with couples making out in their cars, terrible audio coming from a heavy metal speaker hanging on a window, and just total atmospheric distraction.
Oh, right. It's not exactly a quiet cinema.
Not at all. Castle and Corman realized that to compete for attention, the movie couldn't just be a passive viewing experience. It had to be visceral. It had to be a physical event.
So the buzzing seats weren't apologizing for a bad movie. They were guaranteeing an immersive night out that you couldn't possibly get by sitting at home watching television.
Precisely. And beneath those gimmicks, B-movies were actually tackling really heavy thematic material. Mainstream A-list Hollywood was terrified of making movies about the Cold War or the atomic bomb because of the political climate and the Hollywood blacklist.
The Red Scare.
Right. But B-movies flew completely under the radar.
Because, I mean, nobody in Congress is investigating a movie about giant mutant ants.
Exactly. Sci-fi and horror B-movies became a vital space for cultural processing. Take Don Siegel's Invasion of the Body Snatchers. On the surface, it's just a cheap thriller about alien pods replacing humans.
Right.
But subtextually, it's a deeply haunting allegory. Depending on how you read it, it's either about the creeping fear of communist infiltration or the suffocating pressure of 1950s American societal conformity. The B-movie was able to hide deeply subversive ideas inside a rubber monster suit.
But once AIP and these independents proved that teenagers were a gold mine and that you can make millions by giving them the edgy, thrilling content their parents hated, well, the old Hollywood censorship rules were basically living on borrowed time.
That is the crucial transition into the 1960s and 70s. The strict moral guidelines of the Hays Production Code finally collapsed in 1968, and they were replaced by the modern letter rating system we use today.
Like R and PG.
Right. Filmmakers realized that the subtext of the 1950s didn't need to be hidden anymore. Shocking the audience wasn't just a marketing gimmick. It became an entirely new genre. This is the birth of the exploitation boom.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because strangely enough, the template for this new era was actually set by Alfred Hitchcock.
Yes. Psycho.
Psycho in 1960 was essentially a low-budget, black-and-white horror movie shot really quickly with his television crew. But it was massively profitable and culturally dominant. It proved that if you pushed the boundaries of violence and taboo, the audience would line up around the block.
It totally showed independent filmmakers that there was an insatiable appetite for explicit, boundary-pushing content. You had directors like Herschel Gordon Lewis making Blood Feast for just $24,000.
Oh, Blood Feast.
He effectively invented the splatter genre, putting graphic, brightly colored gore front and center. It was so intense that his producing partner actually handed out those vomit bags we talked about to drum up publicity.
But here's where the narrative of the B movie gets really fascinating to me. We talk about exploitation movies focusing on sex, intense gore, outlaw bikers, and it sounds like pure disposable trash. But there's a flip side to this.
There is?
Because nobody in the corporate suites at the major studios respected or even cared about these cheap drive-in films. The directors actually had vastly more artistic freedom than the prestige directors working on studio lots.
That is the great paradox of the B-movie. Absolute neglect breeds total creative freedom. If you bring a movie in on budget, and it has the required amount of violence or nudity to sell tickets, the financiers don't care what else you put in it.
They just want the product.
That's right. Look at George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead, produced entirely independently in Pittsburgh for $114,000. It's a midnight movie about flesh-eating ghouls, but Romero uses that framework to create a deeply radical, subversive allegory about the Vietnam War, racial conflict, and the collapse of the American nuclear family.
And you see the exact same thing happening with the blaxploitation genre. Melvin Van Peebles made Sweetback's Badass Song, funded partly by a loan from Bill Cosby. He bypassed the traditional studio gatekeepers entirely to make a wildly experimental manifesto for African-American revolution, and it was a massive commercial hit.
It proved you didn't need Hollywood's permission, their money, or their distribution network to make a cultural phenomenon. And the ultimate proof of that shift was Easy Rider in 1969.
Which started out as a classic B-movie pitch. I mean, it was originally pitched to AIP as a standard exploitation movie, just bikers and LSD.
Right.
It eventually moved to Columbia, cost a measly $501,000 to shoot, and went on to make over $19 million. It completely bridged the gap between drive-in schlock and mainstream, critically acclaimed cinema.
Easy Rider was the turning point. It proved to the major studios that the counterculture, the grit, and the visceral thrill of the exploitation B-movie wasn't a niche market anymore. It was the mainstream.
Yeah.
And that realization directly set the stage for the blockbuster takeover of the 1980s.
Because B-movies ultimately became a victim of their own massive success, mainstream Hollywood looked at the incredible profits being generated by sci-fi, horror, and fantasy, and they just decided to steal the playbook.
They adopted the very genres they used to mock.
Yeah.
Think about the films that defined the late 1970s and early 80s. Steven Spielberg's Jaws in 1975. George Lucas's Star Wars in 1977.
At their core, a movie about a giant killer shark and a space opera with laser swords are classic pulp 1950s B-movie concepts.
Exactly. But Spielberg and Lucas executed them with A-list budgets, top-tier talent, and state-of-the-art special effects. And then Superman in 1978 proved you could spend $55 million on a comic book character, something that was previously the strict domain of cheap Saturday morning serials, and absolutely dominate the global box office.
It completely changed the math again.
It did. By 1990, the average studio film cost $25 million to make.
So massive hits in the late 80s and 90s like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or Total Recall would have been straight-up Poverty Row schlock 40 years earlier. It's almost like Hollywood is a wealthy real estate developer moving into a gritty, cool, artsy neighborhood, knocking down all the grindhouses and building luxury $150 million sci-fi condos.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that gentrification analogy highlights exactly what happened to the distribution model. Hollywood didn't kill the B-movie. It just gave it a massive budget and then used its corporate weight to squeeze the independents out of the multiplex.
How did they squeeze them out?
They utilized a strategy called saturation booking. Instead of opening a movie in a few theaters in New York and slowly rolling it out across the country over 6 months, a major studio would open a movie in 1,000 theaters on the exact same Friday, backed by millions of dollars in national television advertising.
Which takes an incredible amount of upfront capital. If you're an independent B studio, you can't afford to print 1,000 physical film reels or buy national TV ads.
Right.
You physically cannot get your movie onto a screen because the blockbusters are taking up all the oxygen. So what happens to the actual low-budget studios in the 80s?
Well, the landscape fractured. The classic B studios that couldn't adapt, they just died. Allied artists went bankrupt. AIP dissolved. To survive, studios had to find a new distribution model that bypassed the gentrified multiplex entirely, and they found it in the VHS cassette.
Ah, the booming 1980s home video market.
Exactly. Surviving studios like Troma, who are famous for movies like The Toxic Avenger and Empire Pictures, shifted entirely away from theatrical releases. They realized that every new blockbuster video and local rental store across the country needed thousands of tapes to fill their empty shelves.
Wait, it's the 1930s block booking bundle all over again.
It really is.
The video stores needed sheer volume to offer their customers, so a cheap, straight-to-VHS horror movie with great box art was almost guaranteed to make its money back in rental fees.
You've hit the nail on the head. The economics of the video store saved the B-movie, and that eventually evolved into the 2000s digital revolution. With the advent of cheap CGI and digital cameras, you get companies like The Asylum or the Sci-Fi Channel, mass-producing incredibly cheap creature features like Sharknado.
Oh, Sharknado.
It's a complete return to the 1950s Roger Corman business model just replacing rubber monster suits with digital sharks.
But because this gentrification pushed true B movies out of theaters and onto VHS tapes and cable networks, the very language we use to describe these films had to fracture and evolve, right? B movie didn't quite cover the sheer variety of lower tier entertainment anymore.
Right. The lexicon expanded to categorize just how far down the budget ladder of film sat.
Yeah.
In the 80s, the term C movie popped up, specifically to describe that cheap cable TV filler we just discussed. The C literally stood for cable, while also implying a grade below B.
Makes sense.
Shows like Mystery Science Theater 3000 built an entire cultural phenomenon by gently mocking these exact types of films.
Then you descend even further to the Z movie. This is the absolute bottom of the barrel. Micro budgets, often a total lack of artistic merit or even basic technical competency. Like, you can literally see the microphone dropping into the shot.
Yeah, the classic historical example always cited there is Ed Wood's Plan 9 from Outer Space. There's also psychotronic, which is a fantastic term coined by critic Michael J. Weldon. It describes those bizarre, obscure genre films that mainstream critics completely ignore, but fans celebrate for their sheer camp value and weirdness.
I love that term.
But perhaps the most culturally significant evolution of the term isn't about movies at all. It's B television.
B television. How does the B movie aesthetic apply to TV broadcasting?
So this is a theory put forward by German media scholar Heidemarie Schumacher. She observed that as commercial television expanded in Germany, it needed to build audience loyalty quickly and, more importantly, cheaply. So it adopted the core tactics of the B movie.
What does that look like in practice?
Schumacher argues that B television relies heavily on emotional manipulation. They create special news programs that lean heavily into sensationalized sex and crime stories with frantic, fast-paced editing. And they produce reality TV shows that actually intervene in real people's lives to generate conflict.
Wow.
The goal of this programming isn't to inform the viewer, it's to create visceral, emotional engagement.
So what does this all mean? Wait. If the tactics of B television are relying on frantic editing, exploiting real people's emotions, and leaning into sensationalized sex and conflict for cheap ratings, doesn't that mean every time you watch a modern reality TV show, a dating show, or a Real Housewives reunion, you are essentially just consuming the modern equivalent of a 1970s grindhouse exploitation film?
It is the exact same psychological mechanism. The medium changed, but human psychology didn't. The desire for unpretentious, visceral, easily consumable entertainment didn't disappear when the drive-ins closed down or when the video stores went bankrupt.
It just moved.
It just migrated from the outdoor screen to the VHS player directly to your living room couch. The mechanisms of exploitation simply adapted to the most dominant format of the era.
When you lay the history out like that, it completely changes how you look at the media landscape. B-movies aren't a mark of poor quality or failure. They are a badge of relentless survival and pure, scrappy innovation. Without the penny-pinching world of the B-movie, there is no Star Wars. There is no independent film movement. There is no modern blockbuster. The entire language of modern cinema was written by people trying to make a quick buck on a 4-day shooting schedule.
Which leaves us with a really fascinating question about the future. Today, the technological and financial barriers to entry have completely collapsed. Anyone with a smartphone can shoot a movie in 4K resolution, edit it on a basic laptop, and distribute it globally on YouTube or TikTok for absolutely free.
That's true.
If the financial walls that separated A-lists from Poverty Row have fallen, and the line between an amateur video and a studio film is completely blurred by technology, does the B-movie even exist anymore? Or has the entire internet simply become one giant global Poverty Row?
That is an incredible thought to end on. The sheer volume of content being uploaded every minute makes 1930s Hollywood look slow. Next time you're scrolling past some bizarre, trashy-looking video on your feed or a chaotic reality show, look a little closer at the mechanics of what they're doing to hold your attention. You might just be watching the next evolution of cinema happening right in front of you. Keep your popcorn handy and watch out for buzzing seats. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.